part of the Católica family, and I'm counting on you to make the world a better place.
Remember the journey. The decisive moments that define you, that change you, and make you grow. Remember the journey and the ones that were always by your side, pushing you, challenging you, caring for you. Remember the journey and take the leap. Be the change. Be the symbol. And inspire others around you. Remember the journey and keep moving forward. Step ahead in your career. Make a difference.
Good morning and welcome to today's executive webinar, The Future of Work with AI. My name is Nuno Moreira and I'm super excited to be here with you today in this session held by Católica-Lisbon Executive Education. Just a reminder that this webinar will be held in English, as we have a lot of visitors from other countries joining us today, which is a pleasure. Thank you for coming along. So today we'll be exploring the growing role of artificial intelligence in shaping the workplace of tomorrow, with a special focus on HR. This session will help you to better understand what AI is, how it connects with machine learning and data science, and what it means for talent, leadership, and organizational transformation. We have the pleasure to have here with us today two exceptional speakers who bring a unique perspective to this conversation. Nuno Moreira da Cruz, Dean of Executive Education at Católica-Lisbon, and Miguel Godinho Matos, Dean of Faculty at Católica-Lisbon, and a professor with deep expertise in AI, data science, digital strategy, and innovation. The session will last about 30 to 35 minutes, and we will open up the Q&A session at the end. So feel free to drop your questions in the Q&A box throughout the session. Great, let's dive in. Nuno and Miguel, over to you.
Thanks, Joanna. Well, welcome back, everybody. I'm really excited to see so many people around. I mean, clearly the artificial intelligence is the issue these days that in all sorts of organizations we have to deal with. So my name is Nuno Moreira da Cruz. I'm the Dean of Executive Education. And the reason why AI is clearly one of our most important capabilities at Católica, and it's because we have the privilege of having professors like Miguel Godinho Matos. He's clearly one of the rising stars, world rising stars. Miguel has been publishing in all of the most important journals of science in terms of AI. And so Miguel will conduct a very brief 30 minutes code presentation that will really make you think about what will be the new areas of work in the future. I mean, AI is everywhere, and it's impossible not to think in every part of our lives how it will affect our life. And I'm sure that at the end of the day, you'll be very inspired by what you will listen in the next 30 minutes. So, Miguel, up to you.
Good morning, everyone. Thank you very much for coming. Today, we're going to speak a little bit about AI and the future of work. I have a short agenda planned, so we're going to go over some of the main trends in AI. I'm not going to explain to you what AI is. I'm going to assume that you already know. We're going to see some adoption statistics of AI, both in Europe, US, and then also in Portugal. And then we're going to discuss a little bit about what automation does to work and what the research literature on this topic allows us to infer that might happen in the future because of AI. So the first thing that I'd like to share is that the interest in AI topics has been gradually rising over the last couple of years. So in the last 3 years, AI has become one of the main topics of discussions in the enterprise world, mainly because of generative AI tools like ChatGPT, but this has been a growing trend for at least a decade and a half. And it has been so because over time, we've had more data, more computing power, and better algorithms. And together, what these three ingredients do is they make for something that we call prediction machines. So the ability to use data from today to make predictions about tomorrow cheaper. Like any item or service or product in the economy, when something gets cheaper, it gets purchased more and more adopted. And there's ample evidence of this trend. In particular, when we now look at artificial intelligence in particular, and the rise of generative models like ChatGPT, Claude, and other language models that we all have been using in our daily lives, the cost per token or per word that's uttered by these models has clearly declined. So we know that we have more data, better algorithms, and more computing power. Now, since we are paying per word, it's become very clear that the cost of intelligence is dropping. Now, because the cost of intelligence is dropping, it's becoming very, very cheap. For sure, it will be used more and in more contexts. So one trend that's now happening in several organizations is the mapping of tasks and uncertainty, almost a revival of what would be called business process engineering or re-engineering of the early 2000s. But now it's somewhat of an AI engineering or re-engineering. So the idea that we can map firms' business processes, identify tasks that have uncertain components, where uncertainty is key because we only need to predict that we don't know. If things are certain, we don't need any prediction tool to do it. And then we can take judgments and actions. And there's different types of analytical tools that we can use. AI is mostly helping us here in the prediction world. Now, not only is the technology becoming cheap, it's also becoming increasingly supported by a very sophisticated stack of software. So I would think about it this way. So we have a semiconductors layer that's being provided by firms like NVIDIA, AMD, Intel, and Huawei, and other emerging firms in the landscape that provide the computing resources, in particular the chips that are needed to run these large models. Then you have the cloud infrastructure layer where you have the Googles, the Amazons, the Microsofts of the world with their cloud computing infrastructures that buy these chips and deploy them in their data centers to make computing capacity available for firms. Then you have the layer of foundation models where you have the giants of AI, nowadays OpenAI, Anthropic, Google, and the sort. You start having an orchestration layer because it's hard for a firm to get attached to a particular language model if this language model is continuously updated, might change, or might even change its prices. It's very important to have arbitrage opportunities. And so what happened is that there are several providers that allow us to use these models transparently in the sense that we ask these middle layer tools questions, and they route our questions to a particular language model, allowing us to arbitrage cost, intelligence, and so on and so forth. And finally, there's an application layer that's rapidly emerging, where probably most value capture will be in the near to midterm future. So all these lower layers, from the semiconductors to the cloud infrastructure to the foundation models, are highly capital intensive. They are already, I would say, crowded. And it's very unlikely that we will see, well, there's going to be very dynamic competition between these players, but it's unlikely that we'll see many new entrants. Where most of the novelty and innovation will come from is from using these tools to build verticals that are focused on particular applications for particular industries. And so here on the right of this slide, I have three different types of applications that would serve very different types of industries, all of them powered by these AI tools that would run on specific infrastructure and ultimately on specific semiconductors. So we have Harvey, which is a legal Gen AI that's revolutionizing law firms and how legal documents are generated. You have an Avon, which is an expert sommelier that would help a restaurant sommelier tell a story about each and every wine, even if she doesn't know that particular wine, to their clients. And here you have Glass Health and Abridge, one which is basically an LLM for medical diagnosis that is similar to ChatGPT, OpenAI, Perplexity, or so on and so forth. The difference is that it's more grounded in the medical literature, and so when it gives you a diagnosis, it will cite particular cases and medical documents. And on the right, also an healthcare application, which is for note-taking in live patient-to-doctor environments. And you have these three applications over here. There's a collection and a plethora of others that are emerging. Some of these firms are very recent. Some of these firms nowadays have billion-dollar valuations. I mean, Harvey is one of those examples, and Abridge, so the note-taking application as well. So actually, these two were on Forbes top 50 applications in AI for the year 2024. Now, one of the things that these language models do very well is coding. So they allow us to generate software at a speed which is completely unprecedented. And I'm not going to say that they allow you to replace entire software teams, because they are not there at that point yet, but they do allow you to generate software very quickly. And what this means is that while innovation in software deployments in the old days was grounded on brainstorming processes followed by very accurate and detailed requirements engineering, and then you would ask for a request for proposal of a particular application, you would deploy, get proposals, and then purchase one of the proposals that you would get, and then these things would be deployed, and 3, 6, 7 months would pass, and then you'd have something working. And then you'd get into the maintenance cycle of, I need a new feature, I need to ask a consultant to deploy, and so on and so forth. What we are seeing nowadays is that this first phase of developing the POCs or the proofs of concept has become really, really cheap. And so oftentimes even internal teams can put a piece of software to work that will solve a particular business problem very quickly, and will allow the team and the firm to experiment widely with several different features, trying to see what sticks. Now, there's several governance problems associated with that: the emergence of shadow IT or the re-emergence of shadow IT and other potential issues. But I think there's a clear trend emerging here, which is invention will more and more be through prototyping and through rapid iteration of new ideas. That will be possible because they will be powered by these fast models. Now, translating them into production systems, that's something we are not there yet. And so the bottleneck is shifting from being able to develop these tools to then being able to deploy them in production. And so we are seeing increasing difficulty in development operations or emerging areas like large language model operations, which are becoming key enablers of success. And these are entirely new teams that are supporting business functions. Of course, these are constraints and very software-specific ones, but these are competencies that organizations will certainly need to develop if they want to deploy AI at scale to solve the organization problems. Another thing that's clearly emerging in the field is the need to have evaluations. So something that's very different in the LLM world compared to the non-LLM world of software development is that when you have a product or service or an application developed on top of a language model, the language model is not something that the firm controls. OpenAI controls their language model. Anthropic controls their language model, and so does Gemini, and so on and so forth. That means that these firms might decide to increase prices. These firms might decide to change how the language model itself works. And if we have these edge applications, okay, these verticals that have all their brain and all their intelligence based on these background language models, if they shift or if they change without us being able to control them, we need to be able to test the consequences of those changes. And so something that was usually a small part or a later part of the software development cycle is now becoming a critical factor whenever firms want to integrate these applications at scale, which is having in place robust evaluation stacks and processes that will allow firms to rapidly evaluate the consequence of changes of these earlier layers of the stack themselves. So two key takeaways: we can now prototype before we engage in expensive development costs. So we are going to see much more prototyping in teams within firms developing around this topic. Building the actual deployment software is still as slow as before. Probably there's going to be changes here as well, but we are still not there. Now, so this is what's happening broadly in terms of the technology itself. Now, what does this mean in terms of adoption statistics, both in the United States and Europe? Well, I mean, if you ask large consulting firms that serve very large clients, the example is McKinsey, they'll tell you that adoption rates is as high as 80%. With substantial change in the last 2 years, because adoption rates of the firms that McKinsey serve were already around 60% for a couple of years, since 2018 until 2023. And then there was a rapid shift or increase in the last 3 years, mostly driven by the generative AI case studies. Now, McKinsey serves a select number of giant firms. So when you ask official statistics, what is the real panorama of the overall economy, numbers are much more contained. So when we look at the United States through the Business Trends Outlook survey, which is a survey that it's a recent survey that tries to mimic real time how the adoption of AI is occurring across borders. And in this survey, all firms in the United States are included, firms from a single employee to firms with more than 10,000 employees. What you see is that on average, only about 5.7%, about 6% of firms have AI applications, right? There's a correlation between firm size and the adoption of AI, but it's not monotonic. And in the case of the United States, it's actually related with the fact that there's a large penetration of AI use in younger firms, in more recent firms, in those that are less established, oftentimes startups, which have fewer numbers of employees. Now, this is in the United States. When we look at Europe, the numbers are not completely comparable because the surveys are not the same. So in the United States, they survey the universe of companies, so from very small to larger, while the Eurostat and the European statistical authorities, they survey only firms that have more than 10 employees. So again, so already this tail of the distribution is cut out from the surveys in the EU. But what we see in the EU is that for firms with more than 10 employees, the average penetration of 2024 was around 13%, right? If we look at Portugal, so the particular case of Portugal, penetration is lower, is more around 8.7 or so. And for Portugal, for which I have the particular microdata and access to the detailed survey, which I don't for other countries in the EU space, we see that adoption is very heterogeneous by firm size, and in our case, very monotonic, in the sense that larger firms adopt more, and they adopt more recently. And so you'll see that large firms, which in the statistical sense are those that have more than 250 employees, about 45% of them are adopting AI. Okay. Now, adoption is also very heterogeneous across sectors, and this is going to be true in the US and in Europe. I'm focusing here only on the Portugal data, but they are similar for the US as well. So the more penetrated sectors are clearly the information and communication sectors. And then we have others that are typically less adopters, the least digitized they are as well. So for example, construction is one of the sectors with the least amount of adoption. Now, adoption of these technologies can be through various means. You could buy, you could build, you could have a mix of both. In Portugal, typically we tend to buy. So what I'm showing you over here is the adoption statistics by way of adopting for firms that adopted. So you see that the numbers are much higher. I mean, about 60 or 70% of off-the-shelf purchases, but these are among the firms that adopt. So among the 8.7% of adopter firms, right? There's some outsourcing as well. There's much less development in-house or customized in-house. So in Portugal, we are mostly adopting off the shelf. Okay. For this particular information, we don't have a parallel survey in the United States, so I cannot tell you how things are going on there. Now, 2024, and this is common both in the US and in Europe, and I'm focusing here only on the Portuguese data once again, was the surge of text generation use cases. And so what we are seeing is that lots of people are deploying copilots, ChatGPT-like copilots, and are using it increasingly in business functions, in different business functions. Now, what about adoption barriers? Again, I mean, here there's a big divide between what we see reported in the United States and in Europe. So in the United States, when a firm does not adopt, most often is because it doesn't believe that's applicable to their business. I mean, there's actually, so the industry, the economy in the US and the economy in Europe and in a country like Portugal are very different. So for example, there's more manufacturing in Europe than there is in the US. Manufacturing is typically very sophisticated with respect to AI usage and technologies. But in the US, when the firm does not adopt, typically it's because they believe it's not applicable to their business or to their use case. They often don't complain about skill, so much so as they complain about knowledge of what are the potential applications for their own business. When we look at a country like Portugal, most firms report lack of skill, human capital, as one of the main barriers for adopting AI technologies. Overall, legal fears are also a barrier that's widely cited, and perceived high cost as well. When you zoom in on large firms, legal fears are less relevant, and it's more lack of skill, which seems to be pervasive, high cost, and concerns about privacy of data protection. Notice that regulations in the US are much lower down their level of worries about adopting the technology. Now, a very interesting thing, and this is data that is available for the US, but not for Europe, is what did firms do when they decided to adopt AI? So several firms report doing nothing. They did what they did before, okay? But if you take this part out, then the second most taken measure is train current staff on AI. So firms predominantly focused on developing their internal human capital when they wanted to adopt AI. The other thing that they did was developing new workflows and changing the way they work. And I think this is going to develop a bit on this point next. They also turned to the cloud. They stopped only using local deployments of IT, turned to cloud deployments of IT. And change several of their data and management collection practices. So there's large internal transformations that needed to occur for firms to be able to adopt AI. Now, low adoption levels overall, both in the US and in Europe, of the more traditional AI and even Gen AI, honestly, are not very surprising for people that track the productivity effects of these technologies. Because there are several case studies of large productivity effects, and I'm going to give you a couple of examples as well. But when you look at industry-wide statistics of studies that try to measure how does the output of firms change in terms of value added or in terms of sales, or other metrics that are business relevant and in particular shareholder relevant, the return on AI investments is usually not huge or enormous. And oftentimes it compares with other similar type investments that firms could have been making in other core areas of their business. So there are several studies documenting these, and there's a common trend in all of them that on average, changes in productivity or outcomes that can be measured have not been dramatic so far, except in particular use cases or situations, and in particular in firms that are completely driven by AI. So Google is an example, which all their business is AI-based and AI-driven, but those are special cases. But then there's always this complementary set of learnings that we get from many of these academic studies, that only firms that typically have significant IT accumulation, only firms that have educated workers that know how to use the technology very well, and that adapt themselves to having high flow efficiencies to benefit again from deploying AI in their case studies. Again, so these transformations, only firms that engage these types of transformations benefit from the technology. Now, I mean, this means that AI investments is somewhat like planting seeds. In the beginning, there's short-term pain. You need to dig the ground, revolve it, water the seeds, and only then do you get the fruits at the end. And so there's this theory developed by Erik Brynjolfsson, Dan Rock, and Chet Severson. They were all from MIT. Now Daniel is at Wharton and Erik is at Stanford, called the productivity mismeasurement, or the J curve. So it's this idea that AI has the potential to transform, but requires complementary changes. So in the beginning, we reallocate resources mainly towards intangibles. This is going to be new software processes, new training, and so on and so forth. And then these are going to lead to underestimate growths in productivity. And in particular, in the beginning, you can even have negative growth of productivity. Okay. Payoff only comes later, a couple of years later, when these reorganizations of the firm come in place, and then we start having an accelerated growth and return in these investments, which of course nothing grows forever, so it's then will taper off and stabilize. And so the lesson here that seems to be widespread belief, both in the econ and the measurement literature of the impacts of AI, is that firms that will invest early in AI-related intangibles are going to be positioned better for the productivity gains. But there's no output gain without initial pain. I think that's more or less the standard belief in what statistics are telling us. Okay, so what does this mean for the future of AI technologies and for the future of work in particular? So what do these trends and these adoption statistics entail? Well, so before I give you a couple of potential conclusions, I want to give you a little bit about the theory of what automation does to work in general. And so all technology, and the AI is not different from technology in general, can have differentiated effects on work. The first one, which people typically fear, is automation. So when a new technology appears, it can automate tasks and displace workers. which typically will always reduce the labor share of the economy. So you think that the economy can divide it into what's allocated to capital and what's allocated to labor. Displacement causes reduction in the labor share, what goes to employees in the form of wage subsidies and so on and so forth, right? And we all fear the type of image that it's here on the slide. So you have the assembly line on your left, and you have the modern assembly line on the right, and there's no one there, right? So these workers all lost their jobs. Hopefully they were reallocated to other places of the economy, but they lost their assembly line jobs. So and this is one of the effects that AI can create for jobs, can displace work. Now, if we try to see what AI is doing, or how is it being used and where is it being used, this is not trivial at all to measure, and especially with the new Gen AI tools. But there's a couple of very interesting, very recent studies, as recent as May 2025, that allow us to have some insights into this. And in particular, there's this nice study from Anthropic. I invite you to search for the title, and it's available on Anthropic's website with excruciating detail. So what they did is they measured how their language model called Claude is being used, and they tried to classify the types of professions that are using it, and then cross-tab it against the penetration of those same jobs in the United States. I mean, to somewhat create an index of what is being either replaced or augmented by the technology, because augmentation is another thing that we can think as well. And so, and what we see over here is that right now, it seems that these generative AI tools are underutilized in most sectors of the economy compared to the professions that exist. So, for example, 12% of the jobs in the US are office and administrative support, but only 7.9% of Claude users are related with these types of utilizations. On the other hand, only 3.4% of the jobs in the US are related to computer of mathematical use, and these correspond to about 40% of the users of Claude, right? So this gives us a sense of what is either being augmented or automated now. And right now, it seems that it's things that were highly cognitive, computer and mathematical related, also arts, designs, entertainment, and media, somewhat in the life and social sciences as well, where medicine would fit too, okay? Now, so we talked about replacement. The other thing is changing the productivity of the factors of production. And so this is one of the other important impacts that technology always has, or automation might have as well in the economy. And so the idea here is that you have a man digging in the ground with his hands, but when he's given a shovel, he can dig a much bigger hole in the same amount of time, right? So technological progress allows the same amount of capital and labor to generate additional output. Now, the impact that this has on jobs is not obvious. It's going to depend on the elasticity of substitution between capital and labor. The best outcome is when the new technology makes workers more valuable. Because when the new technology makes workers more valuable, more productive, their wages tend to increase. And when their wages tend to increase, more of the economy is directed towards labor rather than capital. But we don't know. So this is an ambiguous effect, and it's still too early to know what AI is doing, and probably it's heterogeneous. For some professions, it's going to be augmenting. For others, it is not. What we are seeing in specific case studies is that there are large productivity effects for some tasks. So I gave you the example of coding, and non-surprisingly, here we are seeing very big changes in productivity, at least coded by, if we think of productivity in this case as the time taken to develop a certain task, there's scientific studies showing that, coding speed can increase by up to 50% with quality improvements. I mean, there's also other types of situations in jobs that where we are seeing productivity increases, where creative writing, critical writing, and so on and so forth. And so if these productivity effects are going to replicate through several different sectors of the economy, this can be really transformative and huge. Okay, we still don't know how broad these types of productivity impacts will be. Now, another thing that technology does, and this is always good, is create new jobs. Okay, so there's no way creation of new jobs is bad. So what I'm showing you over here is different professions, some of which already disappeared. So in the beginning of the 20th century, when illumination was gas-based, you need street lamp lighters, so people that would escalate street light poles and then light them because they were gas-based. I mean, of course, with the electrification of society, these guys lost their jobs, but they were replaced by the foot soldier of electricity, which were the meter readers. Now meter readers are also being displaced by digital readers and so on and so forth. But if you think about it, with electrification of society came several new jobs, like the construction work that needed to be done to deploy electricity, the engineers that needed to plan the network, the power stations, and so on and so forth. So it's a type of, when we have something like this happening, it's always good. Now, what new jobs are going to come out of AI? I don't know. Right? But I'm very hopeful. What I know is that if I look at the retrospective work of very good economists, in particular David Otter from MIT, that has this very nice study on the work of the past and the work of the future. He basically looked at what happened in the United States from 1940 until 2018. And very interestingly, he finds that 60% of all the work and all the jobs that are done nowadays did not exist 80 years ago, right? And so most likely, this is what's going to happen in the next 80 years as well, potentially driven by AI. So I'm very hopeful that we're going to have several new jobs. More importantly, most of these jobs that were created from 2018 or from 1940s to 2018 were more interesting, more cognitive types jobs that paid higher wages and higher salaries. For example, the automation of agriculture is one of the main examples. Now, a final and more nuanced impact that the technology can have, and that creates lots of ambiguities for the world of AI, is changing the sophistication of tasks within a certain job. So you can think of a job as a bundle of different tasks, right? So a professor has to prepare slides, read, deliver classes. So all these are different tasks that need different levels of expertise. In the particular technology might automate parts of a profession and not all of that profession. And then its impact on both wages and the amount of work that's available is going to depend on what parts of a job are automated. So let's say that the job is automated out of their non-expert tasks. So what remains in the bundle now requires more expertise, right? So if you think about a particular job, we automate all low expertise tasks. Now, for that particular job, in order to perform it, the average level of expertise that's needed is higher. And that means that fewer people are going to be able to do that job. They're going to need more training and more qualifications to do these more expert level tasks within that particular job. And so in this case, this is going to be good for wages. For number of employees, unclear, potentially negative. But for wages of these particular professions are going to be good. So what's going to be here in terms of employment is either the same or fewer employers or fewer employees. You'd have to have kind of like a flock effect in order for jobs to increase, or the increase of the need of those particular jobs because of the removal of non-expert tasks for labor to increase. But the salaries, the labor share, might increase because of this. Now, the flip side happens when we basically automate the expert tasks. And I guess here is where a lot of the fear with the new types of AI tools sits. Because generative AI is a tool of mind, and being a tool of mind that does mostly cognitive work, it could be, we don't know yet, but that's going to automate away many of the expert tasks. And so what's going to happen in this case? Then wages are going to go down because the jobs themselves are going to become less expert. So more people are going to be able to do them, right? So, I mean, if you think about an air traffic controller, that's a very specialized job. If you think a policeman traffic controller, that's not a very specialized job. So an air traffic controller probably could do the job of a police traffic controller, but not the opposite, right? And so when you take out expert tasks from a profession, several different people can do that. And so what's going to happen is wages are going to come down, but employment is going to go up because you're going to have more people accessing jobs that they couldn't before, right? And so this is not necessarily bad societal-wise. It's going to be bad for specific people and specific professions. So what do we know so far about task automation in different professions? So again, turning back to Anthropic's study on what is being automated, it's very heterogeneous. And again, it's very uncertain what the final outcome of this will be. It's too early to tell. What we know is that AI usage is very heterogeneous across jobs. 36% of jobs have less than 25% of their tasks automated, and it's unclear whether there's going to be the highly specialized or not. It's very heterogeneous there as well. But very few jobs have all of their tasks being automated. So actually, this type of effects over here, so whether we are removing expert or non-expert tasks, are probably going to be the ones determining how the job market and how the labor market is going to change in the in the near to mid future.
Miguel, just to let you know that we are now on time. If we want to allow for some questions, just
I know. So
yeah.
I will conclude in 1 minute. So basically, the last study and more recent study that there has been, that societal-wide study on the job impacts of AI, is one that was released in the end of May, last May, so May 2025. And this is this survey in Denmark, where they had 25,000 workers in 7,000 workplaces in Denmark adopting AI, and then measuring the impacts of these adoption. And this is a very well done study. I invite all of you to go and read it. And so far, what we see is that training certainly increases AI usage, and this is good. Now, what we are seeing in this early stages is very small productivity changes. We see new tasks emerging, very little replacement of old tasks in the existing jobs. And there's no spillovers at the firm level. And in particular, there's no changes in wages for those that use versus those that don't use AI yet in this cross-sectional sector. So there's all this potential. When you go and actually measure it, we are still at the stage where it's very, very hard to be able to tell what direction is going to be. So what I would like to say is that I think these are exciting times for AI and technology, but the future is not a weather forecast. I mean, there's several different ways that we can influence it. And there's strong signs that there's something big about to come, although we don't know how big and how transformative it will be. It is changing fast, and takes substantial time for people to learn new skills and for jobs to incorporate them, to invent new tasks and new jobs. So I think there's a sense of urgency to starting soon. I mean, even if it's unclear and the productivity results are unclear, I mean, we should start soon. Now, in essence, the economic impact and the labor market impact of AI is going to be very nuanced and differentiated. There's going to be complex shifts in occupational wages, in employment structure, in employment levels. and this is going to interact specifically with how expertise is bundled in jobs. So it's too soon to know what's going to happen. Thank you very much.
Great, Miguel. Thank you very much, Miguel. Quite inspiring and a high opener for many of us. Joanna, do you want to lead from now on in terms of whether there are questions?
Absolutely. Thank you everyone for sharing your question with us. I'm just going to start with this one. Beyond recruitment, where do you see the most practical applications of AI in HR today, Miguel? Sorry, you are on mute.
Miguel, you are mute.
Sorry. Oh, so in particular to HR. So there's an interesting, but that I've seen many firms are using and adopting and very useful. For example, initial screening of CVs, standardizing of processing of CVs into more human readable formats. I mean, oftentimes candidates submit long CVs with histories that are unstandardized, unfriendly to read. People have to go through them and spend lots and lots of times analyzing that. Nowadays, it's very easy to put one of these language models, a robot of these language models, building onto that. There's some funny stories of some funny companies that being hacked, because it's also, since we are in the sense working with language models, it's possible for applicants to be strategic in what they're writing their CV to make it more salient. I don't know, so putting in transparent white that have a degree from Harvard, from Stanford, and from Yale, and then this is going to be picked up by the language model, so creates its own software problems. But that's one of the areas. Careful, you cannot decide based on the language model, because if you do that in Europe, it's a high risk application, it's a high risk AI tool, and then you're going to be subject to substantial scrutiny. But I mean, as a data processing to then enhance human decision, that's a very useful tool. You're also seeing that in staffing. So, for example, consulting firms typically have the portfolio of what their consultants have done and projects that have worked in the past. And when a new client asks for a request for proposal, it's easier to try to match the consultants with their teams. So typically, this was knowledge that was available only for the recruiting or staff manager that had oversight, and that's okay if you run a small shop. When you run a big shop, having a way to do this matching, this mix and match, aided by technology, becomes better. So that those are other applications that I've seen also discussed and used. I mean, and then all kinds of admin tasks and processing that needs to be done that are now robotized.
It's a world to explore, isn't it, Miguel?
Joanna, let me just say something. I have to go because I have another meeting at 11 and I still have to go. But I mean, we have still another 10 minutes to go. If there is other questions, Miguel is readily available. And for all of you that are listening to us, I mean, you know where to find us. If you want to explore more this sort of knowledge, Miguel and the team will be here to help you. Thank you very much for your participation.
Thank you, Nuno. We have just a couple more questions. What low risk, high impact steps can organization take to start integrating AI into their HR workflows? It's not an easy and a very direct answer.
Okay, so that's a tough one, because I don't think it's specific to HR. I think it's cross-border, right? And I think that's $1 million question, and that's $1 million question, and there's several answers. I think all of them are right. It's going to depend on the organization context. So the way to introduce AI in firms, there's different approaches in terms of governance that people do. I mean, the one that I've seen that typically works well, but then needs to be scaled up, is start with so whenever you do a project in an organization, you try to estimate the net present value of that particular project, because you commit resources to it, right? And then what you're expecting is that there's going to be some ROI of that project that you do, right? And for AI, that's the same. So, and for HR, that's just a specific application. So what I would do is I would try to list all potential use cases of the technology that are going to be available for you. And you can try to brainstorm that yourselves, ask in practice groups what other peoples are doing, have a very big list of use cases where you think for your particular HR function, there would be applications. And then rank them in the order of value. I mean, and you need, of course, to balance cost and return, right? So one of them is the potential return, the other is the cost. And these two things need to be balanced together, right? And you should start selecting the one that has the highest NPV, potential NPV. And then start there. I mean, start developing the tool for that. Small steps. Start with one case, don't try to solve all the problems. And then if it works out, eventually you'll need to scale that up at an organizational level. Often that's how AI starts in firms that are not AI native, is that you start with several mushrooms or several points of AI competency that are spread out through the organization. At some point, they're going to be centralized under a single umbrella, and at some point, that's going to be deemed too rigid, and they're going to be matrixed with a competency center or so on and so forth. But I think there are other governance structures that work. Even different firms in Portugal have adopted different approaches. Firms that have done so that I would advise you to ask advice from. So EDP has one story, Millennium BCP has another, BPI has another story. I mean, so these are firms that have engaged in deep transformations over the last couple of years and have their particular stories to tell. And if possible, go and learn them, because I don't think that there's a one size fits all answer for that.
Great, thank you so much, Miguel. We are running out of time. I'm just going to pick one more. Actually, this one is very specific. So it's someone that is about to start their master in marketing, and they are a bit unsure because it's an area that will be greatly affected by AI, and it's kind of asking a bit of advice here.
I don't want to give career advice. I think so. So if I look around, I know of very little parts of the world that are not going to be affected by AI one way or the other. Actually, I have trouble advising my own children into what they should be doing. So, I mean, let me give you generic advice. I think areas of the world that are probably not going to be automated anytime soon are those that involve liability and large liability. Because in those situations, corporations and society are not going to want to automate them, regardless of whether or not they can. They will not, right? So there's not a lot of liability in being a marketing manager. So if you are really afraid of complete automation, look for areas of high liability. I think those are more protected. In any case, I still think that a lot of what AI is going to do to jobs is augment them. And so I think that it's going to automate away, some high value tasks, but at the same time, it's going to make humans performing tasks much more productive and more valuable. So I think that there's going to be space in all professions for humans to be at play. I just think that the nature of the jobs in the next 80 years are going to be completely swapped. But hey, if you would ask your great-grandmother, do you know that today there are people that are prompt engineers? It's a conversation impossible to have, right? Or if you tell her, you know that only 10% of the world's people work in agriculture, she would ask, so but people are going to starve. That doesn't happen today, right? So So I'm pretty hopeful that the technology is not going to be job destructing. I'm hopeful that it's going to be job enhancing, although of course there's going to be some short-term pains for some particular jobs. But that's what I would say.
Thank you, Miguel. Yeah, it's clear that AI is more than a tech trend. It's reshaping how we work, lead, and innovate. We hope this session has sparked new thinking and given you practical ideas to bring back to your teams. Thank you, everyone, for joining us today in this important conversation. Thank you, Miguel. We've received a few thank yous already from our participants here, and they are happy and inspired with your session. So thank you so much for that. And yeah, at Católica-Lisbon, we are here to support you in your learning journey and help you through that change that it's affecting everyone. So yeah, that's it from us. Thank you, everyone, for joining us, and have a lovely day. Thank you. Bye-bye.